It was a rainy Friday evening when I hit the dirt roads that lead up to my usual hiking trail. The week had been long and work had been stressful. I wanted nothing more than to escape into the wilderness for the whole weekend, and that's what I had set out to do. I wasn't a big hunter of any kind really, though there had been the occasional outing where I actually had brought my hunting equipment up. Always found it difficult to actually pull the trigger when the time came. This particular outing, I'd brought some stuff with me, but only because I knew I wanted to try and stay until Sunday evening. My camping equipment was all kitted up in the back seat, along with my hunting rifle just in case I encountered some less than friendly animals when I was out there. The first sign that something was wrong up on this mountain came only a short distance from where I had parked my car. With my gear on my back and the rain not letting up, I almost didn't notice it at first, until I damn near kicked the thing. Half tucked into the bush, a set of black eyes looked back at me, unblinking and not moving. I froze up for a moment, but once my eyes actually focused on it, I saw that it couldn't bring me harm. It was a head of a deer that had spooked me. Just the head. When I actually moved to try to touch it with a gloved hand, it fell forward, revealing the stump of its mauled neck. On top of that, its horns had been completely removed in a similarly messy fashion. Whatever had killed it had done one hell of a job, to say the least. The blood looked somewhat fresh too. Now normally, when I see something like that, I turn around pronto. But I had only just made it out there, and the idea of spending the weekend cooped up in my bachelor apartment was enough to outweigh the possibility of being mauled in that moment. Besides, I had my rifle with me, and could easily just set up camp much further away from this little gore site. If something did give me trouble, I could just scare it off and hoof it back down the mountain before it could come back for a round two. Most of the logic was there at the time of me making that decision. Along the way, I hadn't seen anything really out of the ordinary. There were a large amount of deer prints in the fresh mud, with some possible elk as well, but that by itself couldn't be considered odd when one was this far away from civilization. It still bothered me, but I couldn't quite place my fingers as to why yet. Ultimately, I managed to find a good camping spot and spent the first night in my tent, watching the light drizzle of rain pour off the canvas and the eventual stars as the clouds parted ways. When morning came, I found another strange discovery. All around my campsite, imprinted in the soft ground, were hoof prints. It wasn't just a couple of them, but damn near hundreds scattered around where I slept. Some of the marks nearly appeared to be on top of each other. First an animal carcass, and now this. It wasn't like deer were known for being very aggressive though, so perhaps it was just some sort of weird timing. A herd might have been in the area, and what I'd seen near my arrival was just one of the poor stragglers that had got picked off by something. The start to the morning still left me rather unsettled though, so I decided that I would spend the day hiking up the nearby ridge, a direction that coincided with the tracks funnily enough as I left the campsite, the tracks thinning as I went further and further along. Eventually, it was down to what looked like just an elk and deer that had once walked along there, with one set of tracks following strangely close to the other. As I followed the tracks, I noticed something new as well. Now, when I said I wasn't a hunter, I never meant to say that I didn't have a good eye for details out in the woods. Alongside these tracks were little specks of some kind of dark green liquid. It was on the ground, the occasional branch that had overlapped with the path, and leaves as well. wherever it touched, it seemed to spread out and cause rot to the plant life. Really damn weird to see. I almost touched it, but thought better of it after seeing what it had done to those plants. My guess at the time was that one of the two that had left these marks had to have been really sick, and this was the leftovers of that. I felt bad for the things. With my rifle on my back though, I decided that I'd follow the tracks as long as they kept with my course, and if I came across the animal, I'd get a good idea of what kind of condition it was in through the scope. If it looked past gone, I'd put the thing out of its misery. Well, I got my wish, one way or another. After another couple hours of hiking, I still hadn't lost the trail. Whenever it petered out, I always seemed to find another sign of it that picked back up again. Then finally, I spotted the thing. I was heading down the hill when it lifted its head up to look around. It was probably 100 feet or so in front of me in a clearing with tall grass. Now, from where I was, all I could really make out was its figure. It appeared to be a large elk, at least just from the size of the thing, that had a coat of fur that was off color. It looked almost like moss, it was so green. It also had a massive set of antlers that ended in razor tips that splayed out like branches. One thing I couldn't make out was its head, but that was because it faced away at the time. Kneeling down, I took my rifle off my shoulder and set myself up on a stump, letting the body rest on top of it as I peered down my scope and lined it up with the animal. It was when I got a close look at the thing that I realized just how wrong this animal was. Its fur wasn't just an off green, but it was coming off in patches, revealing dead grey mottled skin underneath. From these patches were the occasional gashes that leaked green ooze onto the grass below. Flies buzzed around the creature and crawled across its body as it moved lazily through the grass. The thing must have been in absolute agony. Seeing something in such a state made my decision easy, and I switched my safety off, lining up for its head. I wanted to get a clean shot to make it as painless as possible, but couldn't until the thing was looking at me. Through the scope, I watched it finally emerge from the tall grass out into the clearing and nearly lost my lunch. It had 8 legs. 4 of them were normal, if not suffering from the oozing wounds, but the other 4 hung loosely between them with hooves that only made occasional contact with the ground. At that point, I didn't know what the hell this thing was suffering from, but I could barely stomach looking at it any longer, so I let out a sharp whistle to try to draw its gaze in my direction. The whistle broke through the forest calm and echoed off the mountain ridge. The elk's head turned, and my heart stopped. What looked back at me didn't even process at first. Like when you're looking at an image that just doesn't make sense, your mind can make out shapes because it's rejecting what it's actually looking at. A human skull looked out in my direction, bloody antlers adorning its forehead. It had no skin on it, nor eyes that I could see, only empty sockets that seemed to pierce my very soul. Its mouth. Oh God, its mouth. It had no jaw, and its extended tongue wobbled back and forth as its body swayed. I finally felt my heart start up again, and without even thinking, I pulled the trigger of my gun. With a crack, it fired, and I was sent sprawling back into the dirt. I didn't even look to see if I had hit. I just ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. The wind was whistling in my ears. All sense of direction vanished as I simply moved my body as fast as I could. Only moments later, though, I could hear it. The sound of thundering hooves close behind and getting closer. My eyes were so tunnel vision, though, I failed to keep track of my feet and tripped on an exposed tree root, sending me head first down the hill where I finally came to a stop as I rolled hard into the base of a tree. My head was spinning and my vision was blurred. My legs weren't responding either. All I could do was sit and wait for my vision to come back. I smelt it before I was able to see it. The stench of death and decay wafted its way towards me and assaulted my nostrils, bringing tears to my eyes as I clamped a hand across my mouth to avoid screaming. When my vision did return, I could see it again, only 10 feet away now. The thing brought its head down as it approached me slowly. In those empty sockets, I saw something. 2 pinpricks of light that seemed to regard me with dull consideration. Again, my body was locked, so all I could do was sit and stare as it got within 3 feet of me and raised its head up slightly. Now, I could see into its mouth. I could see as its tongue was pushed aside and fingers started to wriggle their way free from its throat. First the hand, then the wrist, then the elbow, until a full arm had extended itself out of the creature's mouth towards me. Its skin was as pale as snow, and its nails were blackened and cracked. Gingerly, it moved, one finger outstretched, until it made contact with my forehead. The last thing I can remember was feeling it dragging that nail across my forehead before the world went dark. I was found roughly a week later by search and rescue. Apparently, I'd managed to wander back to my campsite, and well, I was catatonic and unresponsive at the time of rescue. I was not any worse than I remembered. I had a fractured leg and a nasty cut on my forehead, but was well fed and watered. My memory does not start for at least another week after my rescue. I don't know how I survived in those woods for that week, but I guess that should be the least of my worries at this point. You see, ever since that thing touched me and I regained my consciousness, I've been plagued with nightmares. Nightmares of butchering, of the wilderness, of a time where civilization has crumbled and all that is left is flesh and bone. That thing is calling to me. It's calling me back to those woods to finish what we had started.